My uncle gave my inheritance to his son. Big mistake. Before I tell you what my uncle did to me, I want to know you're here with me. If you've ever been betrayed by family, if you've ever watched someone steal what was rightfully yours while everyone smiled and nodded, this story is for you. My name is Marcus Hayes and I'm 27 years old. 3 months ago, I sat in an attorney's office and watched my inheritance disappear in front of my eyes. But here's what my uncle didn't know. I'd been preparing for this moment longer than he'd been planning his theft. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one holding all the cards. Let me tell you exactly how this played out. I sat in attorney Richard Porter's office on a Tuesday morning, watching my family file in like they were attending a wedding instead of a funeral. My grandfather had passed 2 weeks earlier, and the will reading felt more like a celebration for everyone except me. Uncle Gerald walked in first, confident and smiling, shaking hands like a politician. My cousin Brent followed, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, smirking at his phone. Aunt Diane squeezed my shoulder as she passed, whispering something about strength that felt rehearsed. Porter cleared his throat and began reading. The words blurred together until I heard the part that mattered. Hayes Manufacturing, the company my grandfather built over 40 years, along with the land portfolio worth millions, would go to Brent Hayes. Not Marcus Hayes. Brent. Everyone turned to look at me. I felt my face go hot, but I kept my expression neutral. Gerald stood up, announcing I would receive a $25,000 education fund and a box of grandfather's old tools. A meaningful gesture, he called it. Brent's smirk widened. The family nodded approvingly like this made perfect sense. I noticed Porter wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me everything. After the reading, Gerald gathered everyone at grandfather's estate. The house felt wrong without him in it, like a stage set missing its lead actor. Gerald stood in the living room where grandfather used to read the paper, announcing that Brent would take over Hayes Manufacturing immediately. Marcus isn't ready for that kind of responsibility, Gerald said, looking at everyone except me. This business needs steady hands. Brent has been preparing for this. I almost laughed. Brent had visited the factory exactly twice in his entire life, both times to ask grandfather for money. Brent gave a speech about honoring grandfather's legacy and carrying forward his vision. He stumbled over basic terms like precision tooling and quality control, words I'd known since I was 12 working summer shifts on the factory floor. Family members congratulated him. Aunts and uncles lined up to shake his hand. Nobody defended me. Nobody questioned the decision. Aunt Diane leaned close and whispered, "Your grandfather would have wanted someone capable in charge." The words stung because they were designed to. I was being erased in real time, written out of my own family history. That's when I walked outside to my car and opened the box of tools. Underneath the wrenches and hammers, I found a handwritten note. "Trust the attorney. He knows everything." I returned to Porter's office the next morning without calling ahead. His secretary tried to stop me, but I walked past her into his private office. Porter looked up from his desk, startled, then resigned. "I need the truth," I said, closing the door behind me. Porter removed his glasses and rubbed his face. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. "Marcus, I can't discuss. My grandfather left me a note. He said you know everything. So tell me." Porter was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to his file cabinet and pulled out a folder. "Your grandfather's original will left everything to you. The company, the land, all of it." My stomach dropped. "Then what happened?" "Gerald filed a revised will 1 week before your grandfather's death. Your grandfather was on heavy medication, barely coherent. I suspected forgery, but I had no proof. Gerald threatened to sue me for malpractice if I contested it." Porter slid copies of both wills across his desk. The signatures didn't match. Even I could see that. "There's more," Porter said quietly. "Gerald has been taking management fees from the estate for months. Fees that don't legally exist. He's been stealing." I drove back to Chicago in silence, my mind racing. My family thought I lived in a modest rental, scraping by on my salary from some tech company. They had no idea I owned a penthouse in River North. They didn't know I'd built a successful venture capital fund managing $40 million. I kept my real life separate because grandfather taught me something important. Let people underestimate you. It's the greatest advantage you'll ever have. At home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the file I'd been maintaining for 18 months. Hayes Manufacturing silent support. While grandfather's health declined, I'd been anonymously bailing out the family business through a shell corporation. Over $1.2 million in capital injections to cover cash flow shortfalls grandfather couldn't manage anymore. Gerald and Brent had no idea the company they were celebrating was being propped up by the nephew they just dismissed. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. Emails between Gerald and Brent, dated 6 months before grandfather's death. They were planning to cut me out before grandfather even knew he was dying. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was premeditated fraud. I dug deeper into my investment records. The business partner who'd approached me 18 months ago, asking if I wanted to invest in a struggling manufacturing company, was Gerald's college roommate. They'd known exactly who I was. They'd manipulated me into saving the company while planning to steal it. The files revealed worse news. Hayes Manufacturing was in terrible shape. Without my anonymous capital injections, it would have collapsed months ago. Brent was about to inherit a house of cards I'd been propping up. My phone buzzed with an email from one of the company's suppliers. The subject line read, "Urgent payment required." I opened it. The supplier was threatening to halt all shipments due to unpaid invoices totaling $340,000. They'd given Hayes Manufacturing 72 hours to respond before going public with the default. I stared at my screen watching my family's company circle the drain. Part of me wanted to let it crash. But I thought about the employees, people I'd known since childhood. Walt, the master machinist who taught me to read blueprints. Teresa, who ran quality control and remembered everyone's birthday. They didn't deserve to lose their jobs because of Gerald's greed. Brent scheduled his first board meeting for Thursday morning. I wasn't invited, obviously. But I'd invested in enough companies to know how to get information. One of the board members, Harrison Cole, owed me a favor from a previous deal I'd structured. I called him Wednesday night. "Harrison, I need you to accidentally leave your conference line open tomorrow." He understood immediately. Consider it done. Thursday morning, I sat in my Chicago office listening to Brent's presentation through my phone. He was pitching what he called his vision for Hayes Manufacturing's future. As he talked, my jaw tightened. He was presenting my comprehensive restructuring plan word for word. The same plan I'd sent to grandfather anonymously 8 months ago. Brent was claiming my ideas as his own, and the board was eating it up. Innovative thinking, one board member said. Fresh perspective. Then the CFO spoke up. "Brent, before we move forward, we need to address the debt situation. The company is $2.8 million in debt and burning cash monthly. How do you plan to?" Brent's silence was deafening. He had no answer. He hadn't even known about the debt. I met with Porter again, this time bringing my own attorney, Catherine Wells. She specialized in estate fraud and had a reputation for being merciless. We reviewed the forged will. Catherine examined both documents under a magnifying lamp she'd brought. The signatures don't match at all. The pressure points are different, the letter formation is inconsistent. This is textbook forgery. Porter nodded. The witnesses were Gerald's poker buddies. Not neutral parties like the law requires. "Why didn't you fight this?" Catherine asked. Porter looked ashamed. "Gerald threatened my practice. I was afraid. I'm not proud of it." I leaned forward. "Porter, my grandfather left me those tools for a reason. He knew something might happen. Why else would he leave that note?" Porter pulled out another document. "Your grandfather told me something 3 months before he died. He said if anything happened to the original will, you'd be smart enough to find the truth. He said the tools weren't the real gift. The knowledge of how to build something from nothing was." Catherine's phone buzzed. She read the message and her expression darkened. "We have another problem. Gerald's been secretly selling parcels of the land portfolio. $1.5 million worth. Gone." The supplier went public with their lawsuit on Friday morning. By noon, Brent had called an emergency family meeting at grandfather's estate. I showed up uninvited. Gerald stood in the living room, asking family members to contribute money to save the company. "We need to pull together," he said. "Short-term loan. We'll pay everyone back once things stabilize." I watched my aunts and uncles, most of them living on modest incomes, scrambling to figure out how much they could contribute. Made me sick. Gerald turned to me. "Marcus, you received $25,000. The least you can do is contribute to save your grandfather's legacy." The manipulation was brilliant. Paint me as selfish if I refused. "How much does the company owe?" I asked calmly. $340,000, Brent said. "But we have a plan." "Do you?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the supplier's lawsuit. "Because they're not waiting for your plan." Gerald's face reddened. "We're handling it." I left without another word. But I didn't leave them hanging. That afternoon, I paid the supplier directly through my shell corporation, but only for a 30-day extension. Not full payment. I was buying time, not rescuing them. Monday morning, Hayes Manufacturing received an offer from an anonymous investor. $3 million at 8% interest over 5 years. The terms included full transparency, board oversight, and veto power on major decisions. It was me, of course. Through another shell company Gerald couldn't trace. Brent called an emergency board meeting to discuss the offer. I listened in again through Harrison's conference line. This investor wants too much control, Brent said. We don't need outside money. I have this under control. The CFO tried to object. Brent, we need capital. Our options are limited. I said no. Brent's voice was final. We're going to cut costs instead. Starting with staff reductions. My heart sank as I heard him list names. Walt, the master machinist. Teresa from quality control. 5 other craftsmen who'd been with the company for decades. The people who actually made Hayes Manufacturing valuable. He was gutting the company to avoid admitting he needed help. The fired employees started calling me by Tuesday. They had my number from the summers I'd worked at the factory during college. I'd stayed in touch with most of them over the years. Walt called first. Marcus, I don't understand what's happening. Brent fired me this morning. Said the company needs to cut costs. After 32 years. His voice cracked and I felt rage build in my chest. Walt, can you come to Chicago this weekend? I want to talk to you about something. Over the next 3 days, I met with all 5 fired employees. I laid out my plan. I was starting a competing company, one that would build on everything grandfather had taught me. I offered them 20% higher salaries, equity stakes, and respect. All 5 committed immediately. Walt pulled me aside before leaving. Marcus, there's something you should know. Brent's negotiating to sell the company's manufacturing process. The proprietary one your grandfather spent 40 years developing. He's talking to a Chinese firm. $5 million. My blood went cold. That process is worth at least $30 million. It's the only thing giving Hayes Manufacturing a competitive advantage. Brent doesn't know that, Walt said. Neither does Gerald. They just see quick cash. I spent the weekend investigating the sale. Through business contacts, I confirmed Walt's information. Brent was negotiating with a Chinese manufacturing conglomerate. The deal was almost finalized. $5 million for intellectual property worth $30 million plus. Once that process was sold, Hayes Manufacturing would become worthless. Just a building and basic equipment. But there was something else. Something that made this personal beyond family betrayal. I pulled up the patent filings for the manufacturing process. I'd helped grandfather develop significant portions of it during my college internships. We'd spent summers refining the precision calibration methods, the quality control protocols, the efficiency improvements. My innovations were embedded in that process. Then I found it. 5 years ago, grandfather had filed the patents listing both our names as co-inventors. I legally owned 50% of the intellectual property they were trying to sell. Gerald and Brent had never bothered to review the actual patent documents. They just assumed the company owned everything. I called Catherine immediately. Can they sell jointly owned IP without my signature? Absolutely not, she said. Any sale would be void. And if they proceed without your consent, it's fraud. The wire transfer hit Hayes Manufacturing's account on Thursday morning. $5 million from the Chinese company. The sale had closed. Without my signature. Catherine filed a cease and desist letter and lawsuit within hours. We sued Hayes Manufacturing and the Chinese buyer for fraudulent sale of jointly owned intellectual property. The lawsuit demanded return of the $5 million, criminal investigation into Gerald's role as executor, and a full forensic audit of the estate. The Chinese company's legal team responded immediately. They froze and recalled the wire transfer. In international business, nobody wants to touch fraudulent IP transactions. My phone rang at 6 p.m. Gerald. I let it go to voicemail. Marcus, call me immediately. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this lawsuit is absurd. If you don't drop it, I'll prove you were embezzling from grandfather's company through some fake investment scheme. Call me. The threat was almost funny. He was going to accuse me of the crimes he'd committed. I forwarded the voicemail to Catherine. Document everything, she said. He's panicking. Gerald called another emergency family meeting. This time, everyone showed up. The living room was packed. Gerald stood at the front, red-faced and angry. Marcus has filed a fraudulent lawsuit claiming he owns part of our manufacturing process. This is an obvious attempt to extort money from the family. But I've discovered the real story. He pulled out a folder. Marcus has been running an embezzlement scheme. He invested in Hayes Manufacturing through a shell company without identifying himself. He manipulated our grandfather, a sick old man, into accepting money that was being stolen from other sources. Several family members gasped. Aunt Diane looked at me with suspicion. Brent jumped in. This is why grandfather changed his will. He found out about Marcus's scheme before he died. He wanted to protect the company from a thief. The accusation hung in the air. I was being painted as the villain in my own story. I stood up slowly. When I spoke, my voice was calm. Uncle Gerald, shall we review grandfather's original will together? The one filed 2 years before his death, before you forged a new one. The room went silent. Gerald's face drained of color. Porter stood up from where he'd been sitting in the corner. I'd asked him to attend and he'd finally grown a spine. I have copies of both wills, Porter said. The original, notarized 2 years before Mr. Hayes's death, left everything to Marcus. The revised will was filed when Mr. Hayes was on morphine and incoherent, 1 week before he died. He handed out copies to everyone. The family read in stunned silence. The signatures don't match, Porter continued. The witnesses on the revised will were Gerald's poker buddies, not neutral parties as required by law. This is textbook will fraud. Aunt Diane stood up, comparing the signatures on both documents. Gerald, these don't look anything alike. He's lying. Gerald shouted. Marcus is paying him to lie. I pulled out another folder. I have proof the original will is legitimate. Grandfather's attorney, his doctor, and the notary all confirm he was of sound mind when he signed it. The revised will was witnessed by 3 of your friends, Uncle Gerald. Want to explain that? Several family members were already turning against Gerald. The evidence was too clear. Gerald grabbed his own folder. I have a letter from father. Written before he died. It explains why he revoked the original will. He pulled out a handwritten letter and held it up triumphantly. Catherine stood up. I'd like to examine that letter. This is ridiculous, Gerald sputtered. Then you won't mind having it authenticated, Catherine said calmly. I'd prepared for this moment. Catherine had brought a forensic handwriting analyst, Dr. Patricia Morrison, who'd been waiting in her car. I texted her to come in. Dr. Morrison entered with her equipment, a portable scanner and laptop. She was a court-certified expert who testified in dozens of fraud cases. I'll need samples of Mr. Hayes's handwriting, she said. Porter provided several documents. Birthday cards, business letters, personal notes. All definitely written by grandfather. Dr. Morrison scanned everything including Gerald's letter. She projected the analysis on Porter's office screen, showing the family detailed comparisons. The letter doesn't match Mr. Hayes's handwriting, she said after 15 minutes. The letter formation, pressure points, and spacing are completely different. However, the letter does match samples I have of Gerald Hayes's handwriting with attempted disguise. She showed side-by-side comparisons. Even to my untrained eye it was obvious. Gerald had forged his own father's handwriting. Aunt Diane started crying. Other family members looked at Gerald with disgust. Then Brent spoke, his voice shaking. Dad, you said grandfather told you to change the will. You said it was his dying wish. The room exploded. Brent had just revealed that Gerald had lied to him too. Brent wasn't a willing conspirator. He was another victim of Gerald's manipulation. Brent, shut up, Gerald hissed. But Brent wasn't listening. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Marcus, I swear I didn't know. Dad told me grandfather wanted me to have the company. He said you were unreliable, that the original will was a mistake grandfather made when he wasn't thinking clearly. I believed him. I watched Brent break down. He'd been arrogant and entitled, yes. But he'd honestly believed he was honoring grandfather's wishes. You're weak, Gerald spat at his son. Just like your mother said. That was the moment the family turned completely. Even those who'd been skeptical now saw Gerald for what he was. A liar willing to manipulate his own son. I'm sorry, Brent said to me. I'm so sorry. Gerald stood up, knocking over his chair. Fine. You want the company? You'll never get it. I'll bankrupt it before I let you take it. I'll burn it to the ground. 6 family members had their phones out, recording. Gerald's threat was captured by multiple witnesses. Gerald made good on his threat. On Monday morning, he filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy for Hayes Manufacturing. Complete liquidation. His reasoning was simple. If the company was liquidated and sold for parts, there would be nothing for me to inherit. Catherine called me immediately. He's trying to destroy the estate assets. But he doesn't understand bankruptcy law well enough. She filed an emergency motion showing Gerald's bankruptcy filing was in bad faith, a deliberate attempt to destroy estate assets rather than preserve them for creditors or heirs. The judge issued a temporary restraining order within hours. At the hearing, the judge reviewed the evidence. Mr. Gerald Hayes, did you file this bankruptcy to prevent your nephew from claiming his rightful inheritance? Gerald's lawyer tried to object, but Gerald answered, the company is failing. Bankruptcy is the only option. That's not what the financial records show, the judge said. She looked at the forensic accountant's report. In fact, the company was stable until you began taking unauthorized management fees. $890,000 over 18 months. Gerald's face went white. The forensic audit had found everything. Mr. Hayes, these appear to be criminal charges. I'm ordering this matter referred to the district attorney. The district attorney moved fast. Within a week, Gerald was arrested at his home. The charges were serious: will forgery, wire fraud for the fake management fees, and theft from an estate over $100,000, which made it a felony. News spread through our small hometown like wildfire. The Hayes family name was in the paper for all the wrong reasons. The manufacturing company Gerald had tried to give his son was now evidence in a criminal case. Brent released a statement through his lawyer saying he'd had no knowledge of his father's crimes and was cooperating with authorities. He resigned from any role at Hayes Manufacturing. I felt no satisfaction watching Gerald get arrested. Just exhaustion. But the company was in worse shape than ever. With Gerald arrested and Brent stepping down, Hayes Manufacturing had no leadership. Employees were walking out. Customers were canceling orders. Suppliers were demanding payment up front. The company was 72 hours from total collapse. My business partner called me. Marcus, let it die. They don't deserve your help. You can start fresh with your competing company and hire the good people. I stood in my penthouse looking out at Chicago, thinking about grandfather. About Walt and Teresa and the other craftsmen. About 40 years of legacy. I can't let it die, I said. Not like this. I made an offer through my VC fund to acquire Hayes Manufacturing. $4.2 million. Less than half its peak value, but fair given the current state. The estate attorney accepted immediately. They had no other options. The paperwork was being finalized when Porter called. Marcus, we found something in your grandfather's safe deposit box. You need to see this. I drove to the bank that afternoon. Inside the safe deposit box was a small video camera and a note. Play this. The video showed grandfather sitting in this same bank, 6 months before his death. He looked thin but clear-eyed. Coherent. Marcus, he said on screen, if you're watching this, something went wrong. I'm recording this because I don't trust Gerald. I never have. Everything in my original will stand. Everything goes to you. The company, the land, all of it. If Gerald tries to change this, he's a thief and a liar. You earned this inheritance through your character, your work, and your love for what we built together. Gerald only saw dollar signs. He paused, coughing. Then continued. Marcus, I know about your investments. I know you've been helping the company without taking credit. That's who you are. That's why this belongs to you. The video will was legally binding. Combined with the forensic evidence and Gerald's arrest, any remaining doubt about the legitimate will evaporated. But I still faced a decision. The company was collapsing. Letting it fail would be the easiest path. The judge ordered an auction to settle the estate. Hayes Manufacturing and the remaining land portfolio would be sold to the highest bidder. I attended the auction on a cold Thursday morning. Several outside buyers had shown interest. Corporate raiders, overseas investors, vulture capitalists who specialized in distressed assets. Bidding started at $3 million. I stayed quiet, watching the others compete. A Texas manufacturing conglomerate bid up to $6.8 million. They'd strip the company for parts and lay off everyone. I entered the bidding at $7.5 million. The Texas company countered at $7.8. I went to $8.2. They studied me for a moment, then shook their heads and left. Too expensive for a company in this condition. Going once, going twice. Sold to Marcus Hayes for $8.5 million. I'd paid full value for a distressed asset. But I was buying it clean with no questions about legitimacy. And I was preserving jobs. The gavel fell. Hayes Manufacturing was finally, legally mine. I walked into the factory on my first day as owner. Walt was waiting at the entrance, along with Teresa and the other craftsmen I'd rehired. Welcome home, Marcus, Walt said. I implemented the restructuring plan immediately, the same one Brent had stolen and presented as his own. But this time it was done right. I rehired the fired craftsmen at higher wages. I brought in modern equipment. I implemented the manufacturing innovations grandfather and I had developed together. Within 30 days, morale improved. Within 60 days, productivity increased. Within 90 days, we had new orders flooding in. The financial turnaround was dramatic. We went from losing money to profitability in 1 quarter. The business journals called it a legacy business rebuilt for the modern era. I was in my office reviewing quarterly numbers when my assistant buzzed. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." "Who is it?" "Brent Hayes." I told her to send him in. Brent walked through my door looking nothing like the arrogant cousin I remembered. He wore a cheap suit and his face was gaunt. "I know I don't deserve anything," he said. "But I need work. I'm good with sales. Please." I looked at Brent across my desk. The same desk grandfather used to sit behind. Brent had destroyed what grandfather built, enabled his father's crimes and stolen credit for my work. But he'd also been manipulated, lied to, used as a pawn in Gerald's scheme. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Did you know the will was forged?" "No." Brent's voice was steady. "I swear I didn't know until that family meeting. Dad told me grandfather wanted me to have the company. That you weren't ready. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. That doesn't excuse the arrogance. The way you treated the employees. The terrible business decisions." "You're right." Brent looked at his hands. "I was entitled. I thought the company was my birthright. I didn't earn it, didn't understand it, and I almost destroyed it. I'm working retail now, living in a studio apartment. My wife left. I'm trying to support my kids. I'm not asking for charity. Just a chance." I considered for a long moment. Then I made my offer. Entry-level sales position. Commission only. No salary. No special treatment. You start at the bottom and earn your way up. If you prove yourself, we'll talk about advancement. Brent nodded quickly. "Thank you. One more thing. Your father stole from me. $890,000. You helped, knowingly or not. Every month, 10% of your commission goes to repaying that debt. It'll take you about 15 years. "I understand," Brent said. "That's fair." 2 years passed. Hayes Manufacturing transformed into something beyond what even grandfather had imagined. We hit 18 million in annual revenue. We grew from 150 employees to 200. Business journals featured us as a case study in preserving legacy businesses while innovating for the future. Gerald was serving 5 years in federal prison. He'd owe over 2 million in restitution when he got out. His reputation was destroyed. His friends had abandoned him. Even Aunt Diane barely spoke to him. Brent had actually become a decent salesman. He started at the bottom like I'd promised, cold calling, learning the products, rebuilding his understanding of the business from the ground up. His commissions grew as he proved himself. He wasn't the entitled cousin anymore. Prison had changed his father, and watching that change had changed him. The family had scattered after the scandal. Some moved away, embarrassed by the association. Others stayed but maintained distance. Slowly, carefully, relationships rebuilt with me at the center, not the periphery. I split my time between my venture capital fund in Chicago and Hayes Manufacturing. The company that was supposed to be stolen from me had become the foundation of something larger. I stood on the factory floor one afternoon watching the machines run. Walt approached, wiping grease from his hands. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. I thought about that often. Would grandfather be proud? I'd saved his company, but I'd also had to watch his son go to prison. The family had fractured. The Hayes name was associated with scandal. But the company was alive. The craftsmen he'd trained were still working. The innovations he'd pioneered were being built upon, not sold off. I walked through the factory to grandfather's old office. I kept it mostly the same. His desk, his chair, his engineering books on the shelves. On the desk sat the box of tools he'd left me. I opened it and pulled out the note. "Trust the attorney. He knows everything." Such a simple message. But it had started everything. It had led me to the truth, to the forged will, to the evidence that brought justice. The tools themselves were worn, used, practical. Not expensive or fancy. Just honest tools for honest work. I understood now why he'd left them to me in the false will. He knew Gerald would let me keep them because they seemed worthless. But they carried the message that mattered. And they represented something deeper. Everything worth having is built, not inherited. Gerald had tried to steal my inheritance. Instead, he'd given me the motivation to build an empire grandfather would be proud of. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's left to you. It's what you build when everything is taken away. Standing in that office, I thought about the journey from that attorney's office to here. From being dismissed and underestimated to owning the company outright. From watching family celebrate my loss to watching them face the consequences of their choices. The revenge could have been louder. I could have gloated, rubbed their faces in my success, made sure everyone knew I'd won. But that wasn't what grandfather taught me. He taught me that the best revenge is building something so solid it can't be stolen, so valuable it can't be dismissed, so real it speaks for itself. Hayes Manufacturing wasn't just a company now. It was proof. Proof that competence beats cruelty. Proof that preparation beats theft. Proof that the underestimated can become unstoppable. I kept the box of tools in my office as a reminder. Not of what was taken, but of what was built. Not of the inheritance I lost, but of the empire I gained. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And never let someone else's underestimation of you become your ceiling. My uncle thought I'd be easy to dismiss. He was right about one thing. I didn't fight for the company. I built a better one than bought theirs. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight for what's yours. Is to become someone nobody can ignore. That's not revenge. That's legacy.